As we sit in silence with God in centering prayer, one of the greatest challenges, maybe the greatest challenge, is the amount of thoughts that we find ourselves either lost in or interrupted by. So instead of sitting with the God who loves us, we end up just playing loops, feeling different sensations in our body, having good and bad memories, even having moments of inspiration, rather than consciously engaging God in the silence. So what do you do with the thoughts? And so I want to talk about how to think about your thinking a little bit, because that's one of the fruits of centering prayer is you recognize the amount of chatter that's going on inside of us. And the key, and essentially the only thing that we bring to the table when we're sitting with God in silence, is an intention. And that intention is essentially to surrender whatever thoughts we have in our minds, whether they're beautiful thoughts, irrelevant thoughts, or, as we'll talk about in a little bit, troubling thoughts. And I want to walk through a few of the most common types of thoughts that you're going to run into. Again, there's no way to fail at doing centering prayer other than not doing it at all. And so even if you find yourself lost in thought for the entire time, and you likely will, but I mean, even if you would end up having to use your prayer word multiple times, even dozens of times in a session, the only thing that you've accomplished, and this is a powerful thought, is that you've got to return to Jesus every single time that you've broken up your thoughts with your prayer word. So you should never be discouraged. Again, our job is to show up and surrender and essentially just trust that God's presence is going to be there with us. And so what are some of the common thoughts? If you look at the works of writers like Cynthia Bourgeault, Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, and others who have sort of spearheaded and done such a great job of teaching about centering prayer, they collect thoughts into, depending on who it is, 4, 5, 6 different types. And I want to highlight a couple of those. The first thing is there's almost just simple thoughts. Like I always joke when I teach centering prayer that one of my thoughts is I always wonder if I set my timer. So I use a Fitbit. I've also used my phone in the past. And a lot of times when I'm getting into the centering prayer and I begin to close my eyes, I just think, wow, I wonder if I started the timer. Now that's essentially an irrelevant thought, or if like a bug lands on your head. I live in Florida, so there's a lot of bugs. What do you do if you think about, hey, I forgot this, if I wonder if I set my watch or I got a bug on my head? You just, swat the fly away and use your prayer word and return back to Jesus. So those are the easy ones when you just simply have these simple thoughts. Now, more difficult thoughts would be when you're actually in silence and then things that are sort of intriguing come to mind. Maybe it's a good feeling on the inside of your body and you get curious about it. Maybe you're hearing the sound of a really beautiful bird chirping and you kind of want to look at it. Those sometimes can be a little bit more alluring. But again, what do you do with those types of thoughts? You just say the prayer word. Again, my prayer word is Jesus. Or others can use God. Whatever your prayer word, you just release the thoughts. A third type of thought that we can run into would be when you sense that you're having a real kind of moment of inspiration, right? I'm a writer, I'm a professor, I'm a pastor, and so a lot of times when I'm sitting in silence, I'll get a really good idea, like, wow, I think I need to write this down. Or I get an idea for a message, how to make a class better, a blog post that I'm working on, maybe even a title for a book that I'm thinking about. Those are the kind of thoughts that really grab at your imagination, and you almost want to I just want to remember this, right? So when you get that kind of a thought, when you get a moment of inspiration, the process, the discipline of centering prayer at this point is so critical because, again, our intention is to sit in silence with God. So even when you run into a beautiful thought, an inspiring thought, use the prayer word and release it. If that inspirational idea is really meant for you, I trust personally when that happens to me, I'm just going to trust God that it's going to come back to me later. I'm not even going to worry about trying to remember it, because my intention is to be with God in silence and not allow my thoughts to distract me from my goal of sort of having a soul-to-soul experience with God. Another type of thought is the monitoring thought, or a self-reflecting thought. This is where you think things like, wow, I'm just surrounded by all my thoughts, or I'm really enjoying this communion with God, or wow, I'm connected with God. And as soon as you begin to think that, you're suddenly not, right? Because you've just broken up whatever kind of communion you had with a thought. So you even have to release that with the prayer word. Now, the hardest types of thoughts, and this is where centering prayer takes us into a real deep dive, would be thoughts that Keating would call interior purification. Basil Pennington would call this stressful thoughts. Evagrius Ponticus might call it evil thoughts or troubling thoughts. Keating also has a wonderful phrase, divine therapy. This is when, and this is the work that God really wants to do in us, it's when in silence our insides, our unconscious, sort of uploads into our awareness. And so we may remember really difficult, painful thoughts in our mind, places where we were hurt. Sometimes trauma comes up. I've seen people break into tears while they were doing centering prayer because they had this really powerful, troubling memory of some past trauma. The so-called 7 deadly sins, or Evagrius Ponticus 8 evil thoughts, will emerge. So sometimes you'll have thoughts about things that you want. These would be the disordered desires of things like greed, gluttony, lust, anger, sadness, spiritual laziness or sloth, and then pride and vainglory. Those types of things will appear before us. And the temptation when you run into something that's just incredibly traumatic or anxiety causing, or sometimes these sinful practices or these disordered desires within us, the temptation is to push them back down. Kind of like in Genesis 3, when after Adam and Eve partake of the fruit, when God comes around, they go hide behind a tree, right? And that's sort of hilarious, because obviously God knows exactly where they are. Just like for us, like when troubling, painful thoughts emerge, just remember God already knows what's going on inside of us. And so in a sense, it's an opportunity to say, Lord, take this pain for me, take this guilt, take this shame, take these fears, take this hurt. And so you just say the prayer word, and it's not a matter of pushing back down. It's gently releasing and surrendering those thoughts. Now, if you do this, if you're disciplined, and remember that when we do centering prayer, it's all about our intention to be in silence with God. Give your thoughts to God. Use the prayer word. Remember the 4 R's. You resist no thought, because they're going to come in. We retain no thought. Just let them go. Again, especially inspirational thoughts that are things you want to remember. Don't retain them. You just continue to surrender. Don't react to difficult and painful thoughts. Instead, gently return to Jesus with your prayer word. And if you have any questions about centering prayer, I invite you to reach out to me. You can put comments wherever you're seeing this video, or you can email me directly, deepdivespirituality@gmail.com. And I'd also love it if you take a look at my book, Centering Prayer, Sitting Quietly in God's Presence Can Change Your Life. It's now available from Paraclete Press, wherever you buy books. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.